I'd like to say that many of the checks and balances we are going to discuss are missed by buyer agents representing their buyers, and it's information that's not always available or even deemed reliable by the listing agents themselves.
The information provided on an MLS listing is not legally binding. What is legally binding is what is actually on the agreement of purchase and sale. Just because something might look a certain way online or the listing, it does not mean that the seller is obligated to anything.
Anecdotal story, I had clients last year who found this cute little house. And when we looked at this, we were doing our due diligence and we realized it's going to exist right over top of the Ontario line X number of years from now. And then when I pointed this out to them, they laughed. I said, and you wouldn't even get the convenience of it because you're smack dab in the middle of two stations, which are really far away. So you'd have this train going by underneath your house all day long. Hey everybody, welcome to today's Toronto Real Estate Podcast, where we guide buyers and their agents through essential due diligence before acquiring a Toronto home. Shockingly, many overlook these crucial steps, risking unwelcome surprises. In this episode, we cover key topics like the impact of school district ratings on property value, navigating building permits, and understanding parking regulations, house stigmas, and boundary lines in Toronto. We also explore how the new Ontario Line project and basic neighborhood demographics may influence your property choice and its value long-term. Please do not forget to like, subscribe, or comment below. We always love to hear from you. My name's Ian Busher. I'm a broker with the Fox Marin team. Please keep her number handy. This is Kori Marin, in-house hype girl and resident listing expert broker. And a good man to know, Mr. Ralph Fox, our analytical, investor-driven macro picture watcher. Today, we're focused on helping you go into your property purchase confidently, eyes wide open, and without any unwelcome surprises. Let's jump into it. Kori Marin, how are you?
I'm well. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Nice to see your smiling face again. It's been a little break, so if I do a couple of flubs here, I'm just easing back into this.
Oh my gosh, of course. I'm all about the flubs and the word like. So audience, if you hear me say the word like, we got to have somebody should count one time how many times I say it in a podcast. So I'm aware. And
I think, Kori, our editor does.
I had no idea.
I don't know. We should have a contest though. Your likes versus my ums.
Yes.
And I think it would be a high tally on either side, and it would be a very close, long-fought battle.
Okay, well, that makes me feel better. Well, I'm absolutely thrilled that we're going to be talking about this today. First of all, I'd like to say that many of the checks and balances we are going to discuss are missed by buyer agents representing their buyers, and it's information that's not always available or even deemed reliable by the listing agents themselves. So these are some really good nuggets. If you're planning on purchasing home this year or next year or even the year after, keep these tips in mind. They are going to be great resources for you. I also wanted to add that I'm going to create in the show notes links to all of these things so that they'll always be there at your disposal. If you're like, remember, I saw this podcast, these three people, they were talking about it. What was that again? You can always refer back here, go to the link and do the search and the due diligence we're going to speak about now. So when you are making one of the largest financial investments of your life, we want to ensure that you have the tools to be successful. We're going to break all of this down for you. So think about you're buying a home in Toronto. We want you to do this bonus due diligence when you're offering or before you're offering so that you feel confident about what you are acquiring. So these are some big things that may or may not affect the value now or long term. So let's start here. School districts and the Fraser Institute of School Ratings. So when you are buying a home in Toronto, you are going to be searching for the school district or the public school catchment that the house is located in. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to the Toronto District School Board website. You're going to type in the street address, not the postal code, but the street address for your potential new home. And you're going to be able to pull up the names of all the school districts that belong to that actual street number. All right. So you have to be very careful because they do it kind of like even versus odd numbers. And sometimes one street might be divided into two different catchment areas. So you want to start here. Toronto District School Board. Get those school names. Move that over to something called Compare School Ratings. This is on as part of the Fraser Institute. And again, this is going to be listed in the show notes. You're going to go in there, you're going to type in the school that your child may potentially be attending. And we're talking about public schools here. So you'll type in like ABC elementary school located here, here, and here. And then the Fraser Institute has a rating of that school, and it compares lots of different things. And it gives you an overall rating out of 10. And then it breaks down by like subject matter as well. And there you can read about the school and the principal and a whole bunch of information. Now, the reason this is important is one, you probably want your kid to go to a decent school. School districts really affect property values, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And the listing agents often supply this information in their listing material. However, they are not always correct. So your school district can heavily influence what you might be willing to pay for a property. And it's something you really need to consider, even if you don't even have kids, because it affects your property values. So, guys, when it comes to the pros and cons of public school catchment areas, what is your feedback and due diligence on that? Ian, do you want to start with that?
Oftentimes, even if that material is supplied, just like you said, Kori, I'll go in and do it myself anyway, because I don't necessarily trust other agents that it's been done correctly. Maybe they've had an assistant doing, whether it's intentionally incorrect or intentionally incorrect in order to sort of try to beef up the value of the home. This is one of the things that's on my checklist for every property I'm going to put an offer in on. And something else I wanted to add too is for those childless couples out there who maybe are thinking about not having kids ever, if you're in competition for these homes, the people with kids or who are thinking about starting a family may actually sort of surpass you because that home's going to have potentially more value to them if they can.
So one really good area as an example of this is a street called Browning Avenue in Plater Estates. And Plater Estates is just located north of the Danforth and just east of Broadview Avenue. And most of the streets in this little catchment area go to a public school district under the Jackman School District, which is like a highly coveted educational public school sector in Toronto. But there's a little section of Browning Avenue at the very end that does not quite meet the borders for kids to go to the Jackman School. So there's like, I don't know, 10 houses at the end.
Mm-hmm.
You know, 10, 15 houses at the very end of that street, which everyone really, really knows and loves. And actually, we have like 5 or 6 clients that live on that street, in fact. But that section of those last like 10 to 15 houses don't belong to Jackman. So if you don't know that before you offer on a property and think that your kid is going to Jackman, you're willing to pay a premium for it. And then only to find out once you move in and do your due diligence and getting your kids ready to go to school and register them that they can't go there because of your street number. That is really going to be a bombshell that no one wants to take on. So
there's going to be a bit of upset there.
Yeah, like I think there's a couple interesting aspects to this. First of all, if you are a young couple that maybe kids are 5 years away, maybe you have one on the way, you might look at school districts and be like, you know what, we're really trying to get from a condo as first-time buyers into a house, and our kids aren't going to be needing to be in a school district for, let's say, 5 years, 4 years, 6 years. It may make sense as part of a strategy just to be able to get that coveted low-rise, semi-detached, detached house, is to be willing to sacrifice that, knowing that you're getting into a better asset class with higher potential for appreciation long-term, as a way to know you've got a shelf life of 3 to 5 years, but you have a lower entry point and still potentially be, in a neighborhood like Plater Estates. So in some ways, if you're strategic about it, it can allow you to get into properties or areas you might not normally be able to get into if an entire school catchment covered an entire area. So that's one thing to think about. And the other thing that is interesting is I've seen a lot of clients and we've had conversations about their dissatisfaction or lack of accuracy with the Fraser Institute ratings. Now, that happens to be the gold standard, but we have some clients who are in situations where school districts really, really, really matter to them, obviously, for a whole host of reasons. And so one of the things I would highly recommend is to take that one step further, see if you know parents or kids who go to the school, see if you can get an interview or have them speak with somebody from the administration, even a principal, to really get a sense of, is this the type of environment that you want your child to go into, knowing that the Fraser Institute is not the be all and end all. So there's a lot to both sides of this. And we certainly see a lot of our client searches led by school districts, and bedroom counts seem to go hand in hand, but it isn't the be all and end all for some. And for others, that's just a stepping stone for even further due diligence.
Yes, I love those points. And a couple things is the Fraser Institute is a couple years behind in their ratings. And the other thing that I've really noticed over time being in this business is as areas become more gentrified and the densification increases and areas become more income savvy in specific demographics, then the institute ratings will go up because the school will do better overall in that type of testing. So you can usually grow with your school district. And as Ralph mentioned, be strategic and be like, I don't need to have like a 9 to 10 school rating. I need something that's decent enough. I mean, we all went to schools like that. And I think we turned out fine. A lot of areas have seen drastic improvement in the public school district as the areas have become more gentrified. So definitely a piece of this, something that you want to know, and then you can make your decision based on all the information that's out there. Awesome. Okay, moving on. The City of Toronto Application Center. What? What is she talking about? All right, the Application Information Center provides amazing information. This is what you want to pay attention to all active community planning, committee of adjustment, and the Toronto local appeal body applications in Toronto. So if you want to know what's going up in the parking lot down the street, or if you want to know if your potential neighbor is putting on a third story or doing a renovation, or you've seen one of those City of Toronto application signs and you're like, I wonder what they're going to do there. You can find out all this information at this link, which again, I will post in the show notes. So you can go there and you can search with the application number. You can search a specific address, or you can have a bird's eye view of the general area to see what is currently in the works to be built. And it even gets super granular in there. Like you can see the status of the application. When are the community meetings? You can see plans. You can see renderings. You can sometimes see who the architect is. You can even score the local urban planner's name and contact information. So why might this information be important if you are buying a home? What are you looking for, Ralph?
Well, you're looking for no surprises. So when you're buying a home and you're outlaying that kind of capital and you're thinking about living there for the next 3 to 5 years, you want to ensure that you have all the information to make the best decision. Now, yes, there might be a condo going up on the corner, but if you're okay with living through the construction and you understand that with densification, there could be more amenities coming into the neighborhood and there could be a lot more upside on the other side of it, and you don't think it's hideous and you're pretty sure that your sunlight isn't going to get blocked in your backyard, et cetera, then that would allow you to still move forward with a purchase. So I really think it's a case of just understanding everything that's happening around a property so that if you purchase that property, there are no surprises, and that you don't find yourself in a situation where you have buyer's regret and or remorse with a sign going up the next day or shovels in the ground or a whole bunch of other things that you hadn't even thought or anticipated at the time you bought the property. And it's really not necessarily things that are the obligation, even though the seller may or may not be aware of them, to disclose them. And as well as with the agent, that information is out there and it's your job as your real estate agent. And it's your job as a buyer to have these things on your radar so that you're thinking about worst case scenarios and just making sure that, you know, the old saying, buyer beware, that you have been aware and you are aware of exactly what you're looking at potentially offering on and factoring that into your price accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
You want to add anything to that?
Only that Just the caveat that we do everything that we possibly can, including using this, but it is no guarantee that that gas station / mechanic / vacant lot / whatever else on the corner, even though there's no development application submitted to the city today, won't become that in 2 to 3 years. So as well as using this tool, kind of just use your common sense, right? Like, what does this look like? Even though it's not there today, 3 weeks from now, could that sign go up, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something else to keep in mind. We're doing everything we can, but we don't have crystal balls. So,
Sure.
yeah.
And the other thing that we always look for when we go to properties is the ability to add value. So we also look for precedent. So if we're standing in a backyard and we see 3 houses on either side and one further down have all done extensions, then we would come to not 100% conclusion, but the logical conclusion that the possibility would be there to add that same type of value to your property. And then you can go and see what kind of history information you can find out about, knowing that there could be an opportunity to do the same like your neighbors have.
Yeah, so helpful. All right, moving on. Building permit status. So checking for open building permits, it's not something top of mind for a lot of buyers. Their agents and even lawyers sometimes don't look for this. So sometimes those regular real estate due diligence checks that your agent or lawyer completes does not cover this, or it's not picked up for various reasons. And there are a lot more open building permits than you think in the city of Toronto. So you can actually check this. If the property you want to buy has an open permit in the last 5 years, you can use one specific City of Toronto link, which again, I will post below. And this will include information about who the building consultant is and their contact information and what type of permit it is. So for example, if somebody did a renovation on their home and for some reason the renovation was completed, but they never had that final inspection done, then the permit still might be open on that specific address. Or somebody was going to build a deck in their backyard, they applied for a permit. Maybe they didn't even finish the deck or even do the work, but they had the approval to do so. And that permit is still lingering out there and is open on the address. You want to know about these things so this can be dealt with before you acquire the property. Because as I mentioned, most agents don't check, buyers don't actually check, and a lot of lawyers don't even check. Now, I mentioned that the link that we provided goes back about 5 years. You can even go back even further to something called the Open Data Portal. I'll also include that link. And you can even find even open permits from way back there as well. It's a little bit more archaic. It's kind of like a big spreadsheet that you can look at. But again, you're trying to find these little hints of information so that you have your eyes wide open before you acquire a property. So I gave the example of somebody applying for a renovation project. That's when they need to get a permit to do the renovation. We actually dealt with a selling client like this whose intention was to do a big extension and add a 3rd story to their property. Once all the quotes came in to do the work and they had the approval, they decided, you know what? It's less expensive for us actually to move outside of the city and not go ahead with this particular renovation. But when we went to go sell the property and checked for permits on the address, that permit was still open on it, even though they never did the work. And it took about 2 weeks for us to get that permit closed, which is really important to have done before the new buyers took possession. We also had something similar happen to us on a property on Mortimer, where the sellers had done a renovation, a beautiful renovation on their home maybe 3 or 4 years ago. We went to go sell the property. We checked for open permits. There was one still open, and the sellers had no idea it was still open. They even had that final inspection done. It's just the city never closed the permit, and there was a little bit of paperwork shuffle that needed to be completed to close that permit, which is good that we knew about it in advance. So it was all neat and tidy before the property transitioned hands. And had anything about open permits and the relevance when buying a home, you have such a great background with your contracting work and your carpentry work over the years. I think that you probably could add a lot of value to this section.
Yeah, having a background in construction, what I was thinking about when you were explaining all that is that a lot of our viewers might say, well, why isn't the city working to close all these? And how is it that there's so many of them out there? And the order that this happens in is if you want to put an addition on your home or make a significant change, you have an architect or the right person make up drawings. You take the drawings to the city and you get the permit so you can begin the work. And it's at that time when you're given the permit that you pay the city. So this is always all about money. You've already paid for the permit. And you can have that permit open for years and years while you do the work very, very slowly. At the end, when you want to close the permit, all they do is send an inspector to make sure it was done the way that the drawing said it was going to be done, with all the right materials and all the right rules followed, et cetera, et cetera. But there's no further money for them, which is why so many of them stay open. And I would say a very high percentage of the time, you finish the job and you have just forgotten about the city because you're happy the job's finally finished. You have your addition, you have your deck, and you start enjoying it. And you just forget. It's not malicious in any way. It's just an oversight. So 9 out of 10 times, a very high percentage of the time, when we find something that's still open, all the city has to do is send an inspector, and they come out and they look at it and they go, yeah, it looks like it was done right. It should have been closed ages ago, but whatever. And you move on. Most of the time, it's not a deal breaker. But if the work was not done right, or not according to the rules, or the city can't see how it was done anymore because it's been closed off, then your buyer or seller is going to have a big problem and things might need to be opened up again, revisited. So it's that small percentage of them that we want to be cautious about and find out for both buyers and sellers.
We had an interesting story where one of the buyer agents on our team helped one of our clients acquire a townhouse that I'm going to say was built in the late 1990s. And it had probably like 4 or 5 owners who have bought and sold and traded it. And when our clients bought it, prior to close, our client's lawyer noticed that there was an open permit from 1998 on the property, and it had successively passed through 4 sets of buyers or sellers without anybody catching it, which I just think is mind-blowing. And at the end of the day, the resolution was just title insurance was going to cover it off. And that was satisfactory to the lawyer and to all parties. And that's how that was dealt with. And it was minor. But still, to think that something had been open for so long and so many lawyers and agents and buyers and sellers have been through it. So this is something that happens common. When it's a minor thing, as Ian was saying, it's not big of an issue. But we had a client who bought a house, and prior to close, we found out that the entire back addition was done without a permit. So that was really interesting, but ended up getting resolved as well. So you just want to make sure when you're buying a property that it's clean, and if there's any warts on it, that you're able to address it prior to close.
Yeah. So helpful. So a lot of the times the step is missed and lawyers are missing it too. So you can take matters in your own hand and search these additional portals just for some additional information, and ask questions to the selling agent and the sellers as well. It will be really helpful too. Okay, This is a hot topic, guys. And this comes up all the time. Are you ready? Nothing gets sexier than this.
Bring it.
Legal front yard parking.
Oh, God.
Okay, it's a thing. And
it's a real thing.
Viewers, listen up, okay? I'm going to give you you're going to feel it's such a...
Pay attention.
Information, especially if you're just heading out to look for homes for the first time and you want to have parking. And it has parking. It's advertised as having parking. You're like, amazing. And it's a front pad. And you're like, oh my God, even easier. Front pad parking. I can go right to my front door with my groceries. This is awesome. The question you want to ask yourself is this front pad parking legal? Okay? Because a lot of the time it is not. How are you going to know if it's legal? There's 2 things. 1, you can use an online directory to check the address. I will provide that in the show notes below. It's very archaic. It's just like one giant PDF, all in alphabetical order. But you can see there if the front yard parking is legal. So that's one place. The second thing you're going to look for is when you're on your tours with your agent, you're going to see, does this property have a little bronze plaque that's attached to the front of the house or the front of the front porch? And it's going to have the license number on it. And they look really like antiques, okay? You're on a treasure hunt looking for this little bronze kind of medallion that's sitting there. If it does have one of those, it's likely that the front yard parking is legal, okay?
It's going to have a little number on it, right?
Yes.
Like etched into it. And often they're also white background, black print, as well as bronze. There's a couple of different generations of them. Yeah.
Double styles, but you want to see that. That's a win. Okay. That's like a treasure. That's a win because that means that parking is legal. Also, if it is legal, the license itself does not automatically follow the property. Okay. The new owner must apply to transfer that license for that front yard parking pad or that parking spot. Okay. Something to remember. Plus, if the front yard parking license has not been renewed for any reason or it's expired for any reason,
Yeah.
they're not automatically transferable to the new property owner. Okay. So this is huge. And the reason this is so big and it's so obvious to us because we talk about it all the time, but parking adds so much value to a home. So you don't want to assume that that parking pad and that spot that you're planning to park in is legal, only to find out 2 or 3 years later that it's not, and automatically you've lost $50,000 to $100,000 worth of value on your home. Why is this so important beyond value? Ralph, Ian, anything else to add?
I do want to send a shout out that the City of Toronto, both by email and phone, is really great at responding to this. Oftentimes when you're working with the city trying to get answers to something, it can take weeks or months for them to get back to you about anything. But I have found, and maybe Kori, you and I can talk about this and we can add these to the show notes. I've got an email address that you can send a question to, and usually within a matter of hours, somebody from the city will respond to you to say, that's a legal parking pad, or street parking is available for this area, or anything else that you have question-wise about parking. So shout out to them for at least being on top of this particular part of things.
That'll be a tough job.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And oftentimes I call and I'm completely transparent and say, I'm a real estate agent. I'm representing somebody. I'm trying to get to the bottom of this. And they're very helpful too. They're personable. So it's lovely. And it must be a tough job.
The other thing that's important to be aware of, without digressing, is there essentially is a war on cars led by the city. And I won't get into the reasons why. Let's just assume that as fact. So part of that war is they're trying to limit as much parking in residential areas as possible. And so they have grandfathered in your ability to get a parking pad. So if you bought a house, when we've had people ask us this, they're like, oh, there's a spot right out front. Can I just put a pad in front or can I just apply to get a license? Most cases, the answer is no. It's going to be very difficult for you to try and add one after the fact. So it's really important to be looking to acquire a property with one. And also just going back to the parking issue is, a lot of these areas, especially in winter, can be really difficult with snowbanks. We're not having to deal with it this winter, but in winters of the past, especially if you have kids, if you don't have that pad parking or you don't have that parking in the back, and you've got a young family, logistically, it's going to become really problematic during the winter months to sort out how you're going to get to and from and in and out of your car, not having a spot. So it is something really important to be thinking about and understanding that it's not something that's just easily added after the fact. And also just think about how disappointing it would be to purchase a property and using it for a year or two. And then all of a sudden there's a new neighbor next door and, they start calling the city because of X, Y, and Z factors that you have no control over. And all of a sudden you're getting a ticket every day when you come to the front of your car.
Yeah.
So definitely scenarios you want to avoid, especially if you drive or you have a family or parking is important to you.
And the other thing I just want to add to this is one area where I feel that listing agents take liberties in their advertising of parking on MLS. So do not take the listing agent's word for it at all, especially with the front pad, because they'll say, front pad parking, one spot. Okay, sure. Looks like you could park there, but that doesn't necessarily, as Ralph was referencing, that you actually can, and you just don't know what's going to happen down the road. And I think this is something that's misrepresented quite a bit in listings. So I really want our viewers to do their bonus due diligence when it comes to this. I know that I remember a story where we are listing a property for sale. We did not represent the purchasers when they acquired the property, but we were enlisted to sell the property about 10 years after they had acquired it. And they were filling out some of their forms and that they had parking and front pad parking. And then I went to do the checks to see if they had legal front pad parking when we went to go sell it. And then I had to tell them, oh, by the way, I know you bought this property 10 years ago thinking that you had legal front pad parking, but in fact, you don't. And you never have. And you never had it 10 years ago when you purchased it either. So we can't actually advertise your property as having legal parking, which totally loses value from the intrinsic value of the property by removing that vehicle access. And they were so disappointed. In
Crushed.
fact, they were so crushed. And I felt like they were really mad at me about it as well. And I can kind of understand. So like,
And the other thing that's really important to keep in mind is, and this is something that we've learned over time, is that the information provided on an MLS listing is not legally binding. What is legally binding is what is actually on the agreement of purchase and sale. So just because something might look a certain way online or the listing, it does not mean that the seller is obligated to anything other than what is in fact stated in the actual agreement of purchase and sale. And sometimes there might be some sneaky stuff going on in Schedule B, very small print, saying, we know we advertise there's a parking spot, but in this small print, we're saying that the buyer and seller acknowledge that the seller is not warranting the legal status of the parking spot. So it's really important to understand you're buying a property. Yes, there's a parking spot that the seller has used and has used for a number of years, and maybe the new owner might use it without issue for a number of years, but there could be the possibility that a new neighbor moves in, or there's an issue with the existing neighbor, they're calling, and all of a sudden you have issues.
Yes.
So again, these are all things to be thinking about prior to offering on a property when considering a property.
I was going to say, for buyers who are looking, even if you're working with an agent and they're doing all of this for you, sometimes you can answer your own question with Google Street View and the pictures provided. So you look at the listing and you're like, yeah, there's a parking spot. And you look through the pictures and you're like, what? Where? The whole of the front is lawn. There's maybe, and here's a nice segue maybe into one of the next things we're going to talk about. There's a mutual drive that's that wide. And in the back, there's nowhere to leave a car. So sometimes it's just common sense. You can look at the pictures and be like, I'm not sure I'm buying this parking spot. Or it says laneway, and you look at a picture of the lot from above and there's no lane at all.
Yeah.
Right? So you can save yourself the trip there if a parking spot is of that much value or necessity to
Good
you.
advice.
Right? Again, it's sometimes just common sense. Do a little looking around, a little snooping, and you can figure it out for yourself that it's either a lie or a misrepresentation.
Love that sleuth. Great tip. All right, one more thing about parking. So let's just briefly touch on street parking. Ian, I know you referenced this and how helpful the city is when it comes to this, and I totally agree. Use this resource all the time. So residential on-street parking permits entitles permit holding residents to park their car on the street within a specific area during the parking permit hours. Gosh, that was like a tongue twister.
Wow, that's a big sentence. Yeah.
So
Peter Piper.
Nailed it.
Woo, I broke a sweat there.
Performance. I think I just burst a little bit. So this street parking program generally services residential areas where driveways and garages are not as common. However, this is where you need to have your bonus due diligence. Okay. Use that brain. There are caps as to how many street parking permits are available. And sometimes there is a waiting list on various streets and in different neighborhoods. So this is not a guarantee. This is when the listing agent says, oh, don't worry. We don't have parking with this particular house, the semi-detached, this detached house, whatever, but there's plenty of street parking. Do not take their word for it. Okay.
Bayview Village. I'm looking at you. Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm going to hear it. So yes, we're going to put this resource in the show notes for you. You email the city and you find out, are there actual permits available for the street that you live on? And when are they available? And then you can get the cost, which is actually quite inexpensive for street parking permits. Please do your due diligence here. And Ian, I'm really excited for your story.
Oh, it's a short one, but basically it was exactly this. Buyers looking at a house, no parking at all. I think it had a mutual drive that they shared with the neighbor half the time, but they had two vehicles. Both of them needed for work. The city was like, yes, there's street permit parking available. There is a 6-month waiting list. So they're going to have to find somewhere to rent in the area. So it just killed that property for them. So yeah, it does happen that the city runs out of available permit parking for an area and can have a wait list of a very long time.
So make no assumptions.
Make no assumptions. Yep.
And then one last thing just to talk about your vehicles one more time is the mutual drive.
Yep.
Oh boy.
Okay. So a lot of times, I'm just going to say this in layman's terms because a lot of people don't even know what a mutual drive is, which is completely fair. And before I was in real estate, I probably would have no idea what anyone was talking about with mutual drive, but it literally is what it sounds like. It's a shared driveway, okay, where two or more properties share one single driveway, and they drive down the driveway to access their individual garages or their parking spots in the back of the houses. Okay. So when you see two houses and there's like a little narrow strip with like concrete down the center or stones or whatever, oftentimes that is called a mutual drive or a shared drive. And MLS will reference your parking access via a mutual drive. So you share this with your neighbor. And each property owner basically has equal right to use this driveway to access the property at the side or the rear. But many mutual drives are super narrow, like skinny between these houses, and would not permit big vehicles to pass through. Like if you had a Hummer, which I don't know if anyone does these days, is not getting down one of those driveways. So Ralph, why is this important and what should buyers know?
It's interesting because we've actually had clients go back on a second showing to see if their car will fit through.
Yeah,
and
so many times.
Sometimes prior to seeing a property, you'll call the agent, you'll have a few questions, like, by the way, this mutual drive looks actually pretty narrow. And like, oh, no problem. My client gets his Escalade through there. No problem. Wouldn't worry about it. And then, your client brings their little smart car and they're like scraping the windows on either side, or even if you can get your car through, like, are you going to need to have a shot of vodka once you parked it because it was so harrowing that eventually you will scratch it. So you want to make sure that it's actually completely usable. And then there's all kinds of things that go with that. Like when you get through, where are you parking? Like, are you parking in your backyard?
Yes.
And are you giving up your entire backyard so you can have your car there? And how valuable is your backyard? And what does your house look like when you're inside looking at your car parked in your backyard? Like, these are all really important questions that somebody might not be thinking about when they're viewing a property at 9:00 at night with 4 registered offers on it. And you have to move quickly. So these are all things to be really, really aware of, that just because it's a mutual drive does not mean two things. A, that it's an actual drive, or that it's an actual drive for you. And that mutual, has to mean that both you and your neighbor are getting along and are able to negotiate the usage of this shared passageway between the two houses.
Yeah. And that's a great point. People can, this can be a huge bone of contention between two neighbors is that somebody will pull up, forget they left the car on the mutual driveway between the houses. The other person pulls up and they're waiting to get up to their garage and they can't. So yeah, it can be problematic between neighbors for sure. But that being said, there's a lot of nice people in Toronto who make it work. I was also going to say, Ralph, further to your, it's super narrow, I'm scraping the mirrors, I get back there, I've got nowhere to put it. Then remember, you've got to back that thing out. So now you've got to do the whole thing in reverse, in the dark, in the rain. So even though it's easy in July, what if you've got a foot of snow and you're sliding back and forth with this much space on either side? So lots of other factors to think about. Yeah.
The mutual drive can be such a harrowing thing and it can be so problematic. So most of this information is out there to the public. A lot of you know about it already. You can go to the MetroLink site. I'll again link it down below. This is super helpful, valuable information that you as a buyer want to know about in the next few years, 2024, 2025, so on and so forth. This is going to be big time. So the current scope of work includes almost 16 kilometers of rapid transit between Exhibition, Ontario Place, and the Ontario Science Centre. Okay, that's like a lot of
where it is now.
Yeah.
A combination of tunneled and elevated sections with 15 stations across the city, and transit connections to GO train services Lakeshore East and West. There's going to be line 1 and 2 subway line connections. Then there's that Eglinton Crosstown LRT that will get completed one day. and the TTC's King, Queen, Bathurst, Spadina, Harbourfront, and Gerrard streetcar lines. So this is all going to get interconnected. This is big time. It's going to take forever. I can't even imagine if I'll still be alive when this is done. Honestly, if I see this come to fruition and I'm still like walking around, I'll be shocked. So obviously this has major, major, major pros, but it also has some cons. Ralph, Ian, what should buyers know about the new Ontario line?
I think the main thing is if you're looking at a property, to understand where the station is going to be, understanding that that is subject to change as well. But once you understand the general area that it's going to be, you have to think about your proximity to it. And while there are studies that show that when you live, I don't know, within 600 meters or something like that of a station or transit hub, your property values go up significantly. The downside is let's say you enjoy spending time in your basement, and all of a sudden, every 30 seconds, you feel, earthquake rattling through your house. Like, what are your feelings on that? Also, construction, because as you know, this is going to go on and on and on. So, are you close, but not close enough whereby your life is going to be affected with construction and then ongoing traffic as a result? And if you're open to having that with the trade-off of being in proximity and maybe even buying at a lower purchase price, just make sure that you're aware that when you bought this beautiful house, in a year or 2 years or 3 years, you could have major disruptions to your quality of life that you weren't currently having at the time that you purchased the property.
Hallelujah.
Yeah, this is very much like the development applications where you want to know what kind of construction is going to be going on around you and how that's going to impact you. Anecdotal story, I had clients last year who found this cute little house. And when we looked at this, we were doing our due diligence, we were looking at development, looking at this, and we realized it's going to exist right over top of the Ontario line. X number of years from now. And then when I pointed this out to them, they laughed. I said, and you wouldn't even get the convenience of it because you're smack dab in the middle of two stations, which are really far away. So you'd have this train going by underneath your house all day long.
Yes.
And you're not even walkable to one of the stations. You wouldn't even benefit from it.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it must be 5:15.
Yeah, that's assuming it's going to be on time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, this is something else. And Ralph, you referenced this earlier. The seller and the selling agent has no obligation to disclose this either because this is public information. So buyers, you've got to do your due diligence with the Ontario line and your agents as well. And a lot of them probably are not. So hop onto the resources below, check it out. You really need to consider this when you're acquiring a home. And we've actually sold properties over top of the Danforth line before and been in the home during the open houses where the entire house has been rattling. And like maybe you would get used to it over time, but certainly a buzzkill for sure. All right, moving on to something called ward demographic profiles. Okay, so these are basically neighborhood profiles containing information from Statistics Canada's census, which is conducted every 5 years. These ward profiles or neighborhood profiles provide demographic information on your area, on the population by its age, the households, the dwelling types, the families, the language groups, the household tenure, the construction period, immigration, mobility, ethnic origin, visible minorities, education, labor force, income, and average home costs. So I personally always send demographic information to my buyers. They have all of this information. I also don't give them an opinion about it, but I share it with them so they know about it and they have as many details about their potential neighborhood as possible, and they can make an informed decision about the area. Ian, Ralph, you do the same, I assume?
I like to do something a little more esoteric. And I like to drive through neighborhoods and look at the cars parked in the driveways and look for permits and windows. And that will give a really good tell of a gentrifying neighborhood because these censuses are dated. They're not entirely accurate.
No, of course not.
And when you're trying to understand, depending upon your client, the buyer, their situation, if they're looking to get into a neighborhood that is going to be a lot different in 3 or 4 years' time and not have to pay a premium to be in a more established neighborhood, you can really see and feel things if you start to just become attuned with a neighborhood and its surroundings. And you're like, wow, look at all these nice cars in front of these very sort of humble houses, or look at the pride of ownership of the lawns, even though there's not high values of these houses relative to the rest of the market.
Mm-hmm.
Or, wow, look at all these permits and all these windows and all these bins. There's a lot of change going on, or in tandem with all of the other factors that I just mentioned. And that gives a really good tell of an exciting place to consider being if you're looking to be in a neighborhood for 3 to 5 years and looking to take advantage of an area that's going to outperform the overall market.
Yep, it's really good advice.
Yeah, absolutely. I will often tell people to return if there's time. So let's say you're there on Thursday night and they really love the house, but they have no idea about the neighborhood. And this is something that we take for granted because we're in our cars and we're in these neighborhoods day and night, 4 seasons of the year. But sometimes people are looking somewhere that's new to them, or maybe they're even new to Toronto overall. So I'll say, you know what, come out here and get brunch, right? Walk around, do some shopping. Where's the nearest park, grocery store, dry cleaner, anything that you find handy? Just have a look and look at the people as well as the shops and services, and do it yourself.
Yeah. Are you feeling the vibe?
Are you feeling the vibe?
Feeling the flow. All right.
Yes. Go there at rush hour too, right? Is your street all jammed up at rush hour? Is this a cut through? And because we were there on Sunday afternoon, there was no sign of it. It's another good thing.
Yeah, we just had clients buy a house up in Midtown, and they staked it out during the school pickup and drop off because they were worried that little.
It's another good one. Yeah.
Might be a thoroughfare for like all the parents coming and going, and it was like actually really quiet. So I was very happy for them, but I love that they were sitting in their car like detectives in the dark. All right, this also aligns with award demographic profiles, but this is your neighborhood crime data. This comes from the Toronto Police Services. So the Toronto Neighborhood Boundary File includes 2014 up to 2022 crime data by neighborhood. So there are counts available for all of these crimes: assault, auto theft, break and enter, robbery, homicide, shootings, bike thefts, theft from a motor vehicle. And the data also includes crime rates per 100,000 people by neighborhood based on each year's projected population. Now, I'm not sure the data on its own, if somebody was to pull this for me and give it to me, would mean anything or impact my decision at all. But if I were comparing neighborhoods for my young family or for myself and deciding between one community versus another, I think this could 100% impact my decision.
I think it comes up all the time. I think safety, from riding the TTC to walking home at night to lighting to discussions about cameras to kids' safety. Like, I think it's becoming more and more top of mind. I think there's been a real shift in the last 2 to 3 years. I think 2 to 3 years ago, it was something that really wasn't discussed. But I think more and more, it's becoming a consideration and a concern for most people looking to purchase a property as the city continues to grow and crime rates continue on. I mean, I don't know how many of our clients have over the last year had their car stolen right out of their driveway. We have a client looking with us from the US, and they're like, I've been reading about all these cars being stolen out of driveways in Toronto, and they're looking at buying a property in a nice area. And they're like, well, what is happening with this? So I think it's definitely top of mind, and I think it's becoming more top of mind in a way that really wasn't part of the dialogue or discussion or narrative 2, 3, 4 years ago. So there's definitely a shift taking place for sure.
And it's affecting all neighborhoods too. I mean,
Correct.
I think we all know what sort of like the seedy neighborhoods used to always be considered in Toronto, and like you'd be like, maybe just dodge that intersection. But now it's affecting higher end neighborhoods or more established neighborhoods as well. And I do think it's affecting all of the Toronto neighborhoods. And it'll be interesting to see if it's something that comes up more and more with buyers over the next year or two. So another resource.
That's what I was going to say. It might be on my radar more often going forward now.
Yeah. Well, now we have a resource and our viewers do too. So that will be posted as well. Okay, moving on. We're almost at the end here. The next one is surveys. Surveys. Okay. And to be clear about what a survey is, in case you've never had to look at one or I've heard the term before, a survey is basically like the outline of the boundaries of your property on all sides. Okay. So often a seller does not have a survey of their property when they go to sell it. And if they do, it's like completely illegible. Like it's so dated, you can't even read it and it's not helpful at all, and you get nothing out of it. It's like dated like 1935. So there is a website called Protect Your Boundaries, and it is for homeowners, it's for agents, it's for appraisers seeking existing surveys if the seller does not have one available. And sometimes that can prevent boundary issues. It can help complete real estate transactions when there's questions about perhaps like a fence line, for example, or the mutual drive, or where the backyard ends and where does the ravine start. All these questions may or may not be able to be answered via a survey. So the information on a survey plan is important in being able to assess the property and then maintain your property's value over time. So if you do not have a survey available or the seller doesn't have one available, an existing plan may be available to purchase on this website. And us as agents, we have access to something called Geo Warehouse, and it might be available for purchase there as well. Alternatively, you can create a new survey with a licensed land surveyor down the road if you need one. And this would be like if there's like a boundary claim dispute. So like you and your neighbor are fighting about the fence line, or you're required to have a survey for your permit because you want to build a detached garage, for example. So you might need to have a survey for that. But Ian, Ruff, what happens when there's no survey? Like this happens all the time. If the seller doesn't have a survey and there isn't one to purchase, so how is that handled in the agreement of purchase and sales? Just an acknowledgement there is no survey?
The lot dimensions and the boundary lines are very clear and very obvious. So in a lot of cases, a survey isn't really necessary. You go to see the property, you walk end to end, you check it on Geo Warehouse, you check it in multiple sources, and you're like, I'm feeling confident, and my buyer's feeling confident that this is what it claims to be. The other thing about a survey is getting a new one can take weeks. Like I would say probably a quick one is a month. So if it's $22,000 to begin with, I don't even think it's that anymore. It's probably $2,500. So you could see how a seller giving that to you if they've got one and not just being lazy about not looking for it, a $2,500 value is huge. And it also helps explain a lot of things. The most important thing I think that a survey is going to show you too is an easement or anything that involves another party. So the mutual drive is a good example, but let's say that Bell has a conduit across the back of your backyard, and every now and again they might need to get in there and fix something, repair something, do some service. You're going to want to know about that before you pick up that property. One personal example I had was some contractors who wanted to buy this little bungalow on this great lot that backed onto a ravine. And we had the survey, and the survey showed that there was a city pipeline going right underneath this house. It didn't impact living in that house, but you could not tear it down and renovate.
Right.
You had to use the property as it was. So they basically walked away from it because what they wanted to do was build a new house and make some money from a flip. Couldn't be done. The survey was incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
So it's not necessary, but it is a great asset if it's there, especially if there's any questions at all about any of the aforementioned issues.
For a survey to be valid, it has to be like 6 months old or a year. Like there's a shelf life to a survey. So after a certain period of time, not just a question of eligibility, but or how easy it is to read or how old it is, but just it really doesn't become helpful over, I think it's 6 months or a year or something like that. And then at that point, for it to be viable, other than a frame point of reference, and you have to get a new one. So, you know, and sometimes a seller will see more downside to providing one than upside. Generally, the disputes we tend to see are when you have a neighbor and their eaves trough is like over the property by like 6 inches, or you see somebody has a fence and, you know, the neighbor who built their fence cheated 6 inches over where the property line should be. Like there are little things like that, but generally, and the other thing actually that's important to be aware of is if you have a property like Ian was talking about that backs onto a ravine, really understanding where your boundaries are is super important, because the conservation authority are not the easiest people to deal with. And they have very specific rules about soil and water erosion and all kinds of things that you wouldn't think would be something that would be really important to what you can and can't do to a property, but it is very important to them, and they have a lot of power and a lot of sway on what you can do with a property. So anything that backs onto a ravine, you really understand where your property line is and where the conservation authority can have say and not, because they can really, really change your plans dramatically.
Yeah,
So,
and what you're responsible for, and trees that can come down and not come down, et cetera, especially if you have big plans for that property. Yeah.
Very big about water erosion.
Ralph, I
They are.
this type of memory.
Big deal.
No, Ralph, I think I'm going to remind you of something really hilarious. You have a green broker designate.
Well, that goes without saying.
I think when we were talking about water erosion, it was like, what would happen to that green broker designate? You know,
I got the certificate somewhere. It seemed like a good idea. I was ahead of my time when I did that 20 years ago.
You're such an environmentalist.
Obviously.
Speaking of the environment, let's talk about termites. They're members.
That's a part of the environment.
They are.
They're environmentalists. They like wood.
Yep.
Wood.
Recyclers. Avid recyclers.
I'm going to tell you all about termite inspections for a second. Okay. So if you work and purchase, thorough inspection by an experienced ministry licensed termite specialist might be super important. And termites, as cute and small as they are more widespread in Toronto and the GTA than most people even know about or even believe. So they seem, to me anyways, to be the most prevalent in the East End, like the Leslieville area and the beaches, from what I understand. And of course, I'm not a termite expert. So now, many times, a homeowner will provide a pre-list home inspection, but this does not include a pre-list termite inspection. So, Ian, what can a buyer do in this regard if they're worried about termites or want to do some of this bonus due diligence when it comes to termites? What would they do?
Two things. One is you can call Aetna, who sort of is the go-to termite expert, what would you call a business here in the business of inspecting for these things. And they won't tell you, if you give them an address, they won't out and out tell you about that address. They will sort of say, in the area, there's been activity. Some of the houses just to the north of what you're talking about may have been impacted. So they're a little bit vague about it. And I think that's for litigious reasons. They can't just out and out blow somebody's cover about whether they've been treated or not. But if you want to take it to the next level because you're suspicious, if you're the buyer, can potentially put it in a condition of a termite inspection or do it before you put your offer in.
Yeah.
If it's maybe going to be a multiple offer situation. Those are your two. And as far as I recall, and maybe you guys can answer this for me, I don't think the termite inspection is really ridiculously expensive either. It's quite reasonable and quite quick.
Yeah.
So it doesn't take as long or cost as much as a full home inspection.
Yes. And sometimes you might have a little bit of a hint that there might be termite activity from the pre-list home inspection. There might be like a sentence or two. So if you have a niggle or like there's some evidence of it or it's come up for whatever reason, or Aetna might have said there's some activity or recent activity in the neighborhood, like it's worth doing that extra step in advance of offering to make sure you're clear, because it is not the easiest thing to deal with. Because like they basically, not to be totally dramatic, even though I can be, they kind of like eat your house from the inside out. So you kind of want to know. Ralph, do you want to add anything about termites?
No, it's very difficult oftentimes to see through drywall or to see that there is activity. Obviously, in the basements where you have exposed beams is a real good tell, especially where it's a little more damp. So that's one of the things that a home inspector would look for, as is an Aetna inspector. But I think really understanding, is this an area that has a lot of activity? And then maybe if it is, like the beaches or Leslieville, then drilling down and seeing if there's been activity on the street. And then if there is, that might sort of put your spider senses up a little more and have you require further due diligence going from that point on. But it is something for certain areas to be really, really cognizant of. In other areas, not so much.
And obviously, we don't expect our listeners to become experts at this, but just like I was saying before, do a little Google research. Like, look for what you're looking for. Do a little reading on it, because termites,
little tunnels.
Yeah, they build their own little shafts that they run up and down in to get. But the other thing I was going to say is that what they're looking for is, like most thieves, easy. So, if you're looking at how the house is built and what's resting on the ground, you're walking around the outside of it. Have you got a good couple of feet of stone before maybe wooden elements begin? Or
Yes.
does wood go all the way down to the ground? Because
You don't want that.
that's problematic.
Wood touching ground is the worst.
Exactly. Yeah. So, just a little quick thing you can check on yourself while you're there is, how is this house built? Is it tempting?
So speaking of Googling, I think that's just, honestly, it's common sense. So we want you to creep the house and we want you to Google the address.
Yes.
You want to see what comes up. So as an example, my parents bought years and years ago a house in Collingwood, and then they bought the house and they're like, we bought a house. And we didn't never saw it. And the first thing we did was we Googled the address, of course, because it just seemed so obvious. And we learned that there was actually a fire there before the new house that they built was rebuilt. Sorry, the new house that they purchased was rebuilt. So not really a big deal and no one perished, but it's just good to know, because if you want to make an informed decision, you, again, want to have your eyes wide open. So Googling is going to tell you a lot of things. If anything's ever come up in the news, it's going to find all that information for you. So search the address, check videos, and check images. And as Ian mentioned earlier, use Google Street View and Google Satellite and just do a little online hunting. I mean, this generation of people out there, you guys are really good sleuthers. So sleuth away. Do what you need to do.
Put on your researcher hat.
Yeah, definitely. There's also a website out there. It's a worldwide directory. And apparently it's a good resource for stigmatized properties. And it's called House Creep. Okay. So apparently you can find homes there with creepy, curious, or criminal past. Now, these are proud sourced histories, and the information there is probably not super accurate. But if you're worried or you've got that niggle and you just want to toss in the address to see what pops up, housecreep.com. Again, I'll put it in the show notes. You can check it out, and maybe there's just something for you to follow up on there. And maybe the house is haunted and you had no idea, and House Creep tells you all about it. So I think it's kind of a good thing to do.
Like Poltergeist. It was built on an old burial ground.
Yeah, I want to know that.
Yeah, I think you'd want to know that.
Speaking of things we want to know, this is the last section, all right? And there's a lot of confusion around this. And we're going to clear this up for our listeners today. So this comes to death, murder, and suicide disclosures. So a death, suicide, or even a murder in a house cannot be considered something the seller is obliged to disclose. Okay, they do not have to disclose this. Everyone thinks they have to, they do not. So there's no obligation to disclose information about domestic violence, trespasses, births, marriages, baptisms, or any other major life events that have occurred in the house, unless there have been specific questions raised about these facts. Okay. So buyers are best positioned to know what kind of incident may or may not have occurred at a property, if any, to determine if that may affect the value to them or if it would affect them moving forward with an offer at all. So a buyer is responsible for asking the seller or the seller agent any necessary questions to find out this relevant information about these kind of incidents before offering. So if you are buying a property and you're concerned about one of these types of stigmas, and I totally get that, you should consider asking for the seller to include some sort of warranty about it, which we often see. As always, you want to complete your own due diligence, research the property address and the neighborhood through your online search engines, and discuss the property with the neighbors even, and make inquiries about this with the listing agent. Have you guys ever had to deal with this before?
Yep.
And has the listing agent always been very clear and upfront about it?
Yeah, we recently had a property that we sold. This was last year. There was a fire and unfortunately people perished in it. And we were very upfront about it because it's as unfortunate of a situation as it was. And the family wanted to move on, who owned the property, and that was positive for them. It was also very emotional. And so we wanted to be fully transparent, as any listing agent would ever want to be. And we also wanted to make sure that we created space for the family so that as they worked through the sale process, if they needed time or they needed a certain level of communication and empathy for their situation, that we would get that. And we did. And most people were very understanding and respectful. And we had several offers on the property. And the buyer who bought it knew exactly what they were getting. And I do think, though, agents, if they're aware of this information, have to disclose it. And so it's definitely best practice for an agent to do so that they can get ahead of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been on both sides of it as well. I've had properties that I was listing where somebody had died there recently, within the last few years, that we knew about. And so always disclose, put that out there. And I've been on the buying side where it's been disclosed to me and had all kinds of different reactions from my buyers. People who say, absolutely not, no way. And people who are completely understand and say, well, it's that's sad and unfortunate, but I'm still completely comfortable moving forward because people die in houses all the time. And here in Toronto, we've got places 100 plus years old. And even if it wasn't last week, the chances are very good that someone maybe have died in that house over its lifespan.
Yep.
Or been born in that house that you just don't know about because that's old news now.
Yeah, that beautiful ironclad bathtub.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you for that visual, Ralph.
No problem.
Are there anything else that we want to add to this list for buyers to avoid Toronto home surprises? Have we covered everything that we could think of? Anything else? I feel like we have a really solid list.
I do have one, and I hope that this conversation has shed light to our viewers that there's a lot of things to look out for or could go wrong. And I think when you're purchasing a property, and so it's really important to work with an agent who's experienced, who knows what to look out for, knows the right question to ask, and also is familiar with the area. Like, you don't want somebody from Kitchener helping you buy a house in Plater Estates because they just won't understand, necessarily that one part of Browning is in one school district and the other part in another, and how important that school district is to anybody looking to buy in that area. So it's really important to have your representation not just be an expert, but be an expert who works in that area, because that is the only way you're going to be protected and your interests are going to be best served, and you're going to end up purchasing a property that you don't regret a year or 2 years down the road.
Yeah, solid advice.
I had a client years ago say, I found a place in Muskoka that I want to buy. Can you put the paperwork together? And I was like, have you been there? And he said, no. And I said, I don't think that you should do this. And I don't think I'm the person who should do it for you. So I said, let's find you an agent in Muskoka. And he didn't even go to see it. I put him in touch with a Muskoka agent that I'd worked with before who was reliable. And he said, what are you looking at? And he said, that's been on the market for 3 months because it's right across from the entrance to the dump, right? That it just smells like garbage on that property all the time. And he's like, oh, thank God. So, yeah, if you want to buy in Muskoka, use somebody who knows all about Muskoka. And if you want to buy a condo down here, you wouldn't do the opposite. You wouldn't go to Muskoka to find somebody to help you buy a condo in Toronto, and vice versa.
And if you're buying a property in Muskoka, you should be very concerned about water erosion.
Yes.
Agreed.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. I also think we should say to our viewers too, if we did miss something, please send us a note and tell us you'd like us to cover it. Yeah.
Send us a note, or if you're like, oh my God, thank God I found about XYZ before I bought my property because this and this came up. We would love to hear from you. So please save this so that you have this as a resource as you tread the waters this year, 2024, or moving into 2025 when you buy your first house or your second house. Anytime you're acquiring anything, these are all bonus great checks. So thank you both so much for your awesome feedback and ideas and anecdotes. This was very, very helpful to our viewers.
Thank you, Kori.
Thank you.
Ian, would you like to take us home today?
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on the Toronto Real Estate Podcast. We hope you found our insights valuable. Be sure to check out the show notes for all the resources we discussed today, including helpful links packed with information. Thank you very much for putting that all together, Kori. Remember, stay informed, ask a ton of questions, and always do your due diligence. For more tips and updates, subscribe and join us next time as we continue to unlock some great tools and pro advice to help you win in the Toronto real estate market. Until then, here's to making confident and informed property decisions for you, for us in 2024. Kori, what would we like people to do?
I like them to feel that they can contact us anytime with their questions, their concerns, or comments because we're super nice.
We certainly are. And Ralph, what would you like people to do right now before they turn this off?
Please, 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 if you love our content, if you like us, even some more than others, please make sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Be sure to comment if it's constructive. We'd absolutely love to hear from you and hope to do so in the near future.
All right.
Absolutely. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye.